Portland, Oregon. Established in 1851, the City of Roses is home to many famous icons: the world's largest independent bookstore, a dormant volcano, and more coffee shops and microbreweries than any city needs. There are often unique and sometimes crazy stories about the people in Portland, but one of the most telling among them is a story that's not often told. It's one that features trafficking, drug running, and speakeasies. It's a story of an imperfect Portland and the Shanghai tunnels.
The Shanghai tunnels are a delightful fiction based on fact. It's like a Lifetime television special.
People come to our tours for many different reasons. Sometimes it's for history, sometimes it's for a paranormal experience, because things do happen underground. They have really no idea of how brutal the history was.
My name is Finn J.D. John, and I do the Offbeat Oregon History syndicated newspaper column and podcast and associated things.
My name is Michael P. Jones, the curator of the Shanghai Tunnels, the infamous Portland Underground.
Most of the time, Shanghaiing involved, knockout drops. And, next thing you know, the guy is out cold and you're helping him back to his ship, because that's what good shipmates do. And nobody even batted an eye.
You also got to realize that people who are being shanghaied were not residents. A lot of them were transient workers, like sailors, loggers, cowboys, sheep herders. They never saw their families. Families never received a letter from them. And if they were gone for 3 years and they didn't hear from them, that was normal.
People would have trouble filling out their ship crews. And they had sailors' boarding houses, which were they were basically human trafficking operations is what they were. Sailors would check into them and stay there on credit, run up a huge bill that they couldn't pay off in any way other than shipping out with a ship. And farmers would check into them thinking that they would check out again before their number came up, and then they would get surprised and have to ship out. And that wasn't Shanghaiing, that was called crimping. Shanghaiing was kind of the more aggressive version of that, where you would go out drinking with people and clobber them and drag them in the sailors' quarters and basically sell them to the captain of the ship. That happened.
Every different section of the Shanghai tunnels that we have restored essentially means digging it out, because it was filled halfway with silt from the river. When Portland flooded, the underground flooded. One of the things we have to do when we're restoring the underground is collect artifacts. And it's been disturbed so much by new foundation walls and things like that. There was piles of dirt all over. This is after we already dug it out. So we have to come back, and then in these new piles of dirt are artifacts that people have, didn't really care about, because they look at artifacts basically as garbage.
The political systems at the time ran on, I guess you could call them get out the vote systems of undocumented sailors who would troop around from polling place to polling place, voting 40 or 50 times, not 40 or 50, but 5 or 6 times, right? So the more light was shined into the waterfront sailors' arena in the 1890s, the worse it would potentially be for the people who were kind of running the show, which was typically either the liberal or the conservative wing of the Republican Party at that time. The Democratic Party was in remission, I guess you could say. It was, how the parties kind of like go, in the 30s, the Democratic Party was up, and then in the 20s, the Republican Party was up. It was kind of like one of those fluctuation things where they were the underdog.
1919, the law was passed to make alcohol illegal in the United States, and it went into effect in 1920. When that happened, a lot of the saloons went underground. They called it the speakeasy. Above ground, they stayed open, they sold soda pop. When they went underground, they brought their gambling, they brought their prostitution. The underground really has been used for vice since day one. And the old gangsters in Portland, they also utilized it. I mean, it wasn't, after the Prohibition era, it was a great place to stockpile illegal cigarettes, booze, gambling equipment.
Opium smuggling was a big thing. Opium, I should mention, opium wasn't illegal until 1912. You could legally buy it, but it was taxed at $12 an ounce. And $12 in 1893 was a lot of money. So there was, they smuggled it.
The opium dens for the loggers and the sailors and the others were not very nice. The Chinese, those, had the really nice opium dens. People would come into the opium dens located underground, purchase their opium to smoke it in pipes and go on their opium dreams.
In the 1890s, Portland was kind of a wide open town. It was kind of the prevailing attitude among people like Mayor George Williams was, people are gonna smoke their opium, people are gonna hire the prostitutes, people are gonna drink the booze, they're gonna fight. Let's just get them all into the sailors quadrant here and just leave them alone, and it's all good as long as they don't come out and harass any of the nice people. And then that changed around 1904 because they were going to have a big giant festival, the Lewis and Clark Centennial Exposition. And the mayor was Harry Lane, and he was sort of like a progressive, clean up the city kind of guy. So then at that point, it would have been really convenient if you wanted to bring opium in for the smoking pleasure of the Portland opium smokers, who were mostly Chinese people who had been more or less marooned in the country after the Chinese Exclusion Act made it so they couldn't go home without being unable to return.
The Chinese were an integral part of the Shanghai Tunnel history. They were the ones who built most of the underground. They were not the Shanghaiers. They were not in charge. They were some of the victims. They worked 6 days a week, 10 to 12-hour days. They were paid $1 a week. However, 75 cents of that money went to the labor contractor for getting them the job. So they were making actually 25 cents a week. The Chinese sometimes buried their dead underground. The bodies are still here, nobody really knows, but we are taking care of it as if they were still here, because the spirits will always remain where they're laid to rest. Death will always be a part of the Shanghai Tunnel's history. You can't escape it. People died. Knockout drops are so powerful they didn't survive it. Those who are locked up in the holding cells were squeezed in like sardines, and people didn't make it. There was no shortage of victims when you look at the history of the Shanghai Tunnels. And it wasn't just men victims, it was women. Women were not shanghaied, but they were grabbed by the white slavers and sold into prostitution. They never escaped. That was very, very rare. Whether it was during the underground boxing days or Prohibition, prostitution was always part of this history. It went underground, literally. Men who were shanghaied were sold to the sea captains for $50 per head. Women, minimum 100, up to 500. How many women were victimized by the white slavers, nobody knows. Just like nobody knows how many shanghaied men were shanghaied out of Portland. It was just a lot. And that history is like the Shanghaian history. It's pretty much unknown. And what's left behind is the evidence.
The cool thing about this part of this kind of history is that nobody who was around at the time wanted it to exist because it was bad for business and bad for tourism and really bad for all the relatives around the country who kept saying that they should move to a civilized place like Des Moines, Iowa or whatever. And so it was kind of suppressed.
There's a saying that I really identify with. And it's, those who are in charge control the past. They're able to hide things, disguise things, throw things away. And I believe the saying, when you don't deal with the past, it's bound to repeat itself in the future. Well, that's why Portland is probably number one in the country for human trafficking. And I think a lot of people, when they walk away, they have, I think they're shocked. I think it stays with them because we hear from them all the time, or we run into them where they come back for another tour and they share their feelings and stuff. And some people can hardly be down there. And we wouldn't have to say anything. The feeling that the underground generates, you know whatever happened here was terrible. And it was no joke. It was not made up. Just that feeling can be overwhelming. And it gets to everybody who works in the Shanghai tunnels. Every so often, when you think you're used to it, you're not used to it. Not everything is written down in a book, and never will be.